This is a recap video of the session that I had done recently for a client. In this, we had divided the program, which was for 4 hours, into 3 parts. The first part was session 1, which was for basic Excel. Then part 2 was intermediate, and then part 3 was advanced. The flow of the presentation looked something like this. Just going to show that to everyone. We started with a power start, looking at quick demonstrations and essential techniques, tips and tricks depending on the level. Then we looked at some core concepts, some core or key functions. Then we did some hands-on practice on particular examples. And then we also looked at the impact or the use cases for generative AI when working with Excel specifically. In terms of the session topics, in session 1, we started with navigation, data cleaning, conditional statements, VLOOKUP, functions, and GenAI examples. In navigation, we started with some basic shortcuts, tips and tricks, techniques that users can utilize in Excel to enhance their efficiency when working with large data sets. I'll do a quick run through of some of these examples in the video, starting with the very first one. I'm just going to clean the data set in order to ensure that it is back to its original position. Perfect. So I have a dataset with me. I've got around 25 columns and I've got around 50 rows. The first row being the header row. In this, what we talked about specifically was using basic navigation shortcuts. So control plus arrow keys to move from one cell to the next active cell in that range. So from A1, which I'm currently on, when I press control right arrow key, it brings me to the last cell in that row, last column, which is column Y, which has a value. It stops there because it has found a value there and there is no value in any of the columns after that. So when I do a control right from the last column, which has a data, it brings me to the very last column in the Excel file, which is around 16,000 something. To go down, I press control down arrow key to come back to my last row. Control up brings me back again. We also looked at using control G to jump to a particular cell. When I press control G, I get the go to window. And if I put in the reference, for example, B5 and press enter, it takes me to the B5 cell. That's a useful way of jumping to a different cell in the current sheet. We also looked at using the control shift F1 shortcut to hide the entire ribbon. Control shift F1, or in some cases when you're using the F1 to F12 keys, you will have to press the function key on your system as well. So that hides the entire ribbon. Control F1 or control function F1 hides all the options and the groups but displays the tab. You can also go to view further and disable the formula bar, for example, so that you have a much larger view to work with. The idea is that when you've zoomed out and you've hidden the ribbon, you can see a few extra rows, and it makes the process of navigating the Excel data or exploring data in Excel much more seamless without any obstructions on the screen. And the ribbon is always right here. You can click and access whichever option you want. Click back and the ribbon goes back to being hidden. For me to select the entire data set, there are certain shortcuts that I can rely on. I am back to A1. I'm going to enable my formula bar. I am going to reduce the height from here. Perfect. I am on A1 right now. I can press Control Shift and the End key, END, Control Shift End. That allows me to select my entire data set. All the 15 columns, all the 50 rows. If I had more, it would have selected all of that. Control Shift End works in the way that it selects till the last active cell in your range. Once I've selected everything, to come back to the top, I will not scroll. I will not use my mouse to scroll back up. I can press Control Backspace. It brings me back to the starting point of my selection or the starting view where I had started selecting from, which is A1 in this case. Control Shift Right allows me to select while jumping to the last active cell in that range. Control Shift Down does the same thing, but in a vertical fashion. Again, Control Backspace brings me back to the top. The advantage of using Control Shift End is that if there is a blank row in between and a blank column, what happens with Control Shift Right is from A1, when I do Control Shift Right, it stops because there is no value in column D. I press Control Shift Right again, it stops again, and then I have to press it a third time for me to select everything. Similarly, when I'm moving down, Control Shift down one time, Control Shift down a second time, and Control Shift down a third time. Control backspace to come back to the top. Here, when I use Control Shift end, or in case some cases Control Shift function end, it selects everything, ignores the blank rows and the blank columns. Control backspace brings me back to the top. Your data can have more blank rows, more blank columns. You can be dealing with a few thousand or a few lakh rows, and this would always work. I'm just going to delete the blank rows right now. To select a column, you can press Control space bar. It selects the entire column, which means from the first row till the 10 lakh row. And when I press Shift spacebar, selects everything from the first column to the very last column in Excel. I'm going to delete that, Control minus to delete. If I want to move from one sheet to the next, right now I'm on the data sheet, I can use Control page up, page down. In some cases, Control function page up, page down to go to the next sheet, page up to come to the previous sheet. What I can also do is from the bottom left corner here, click on this arrow key, and I can see a list of all my sheets in Excel. If I have a longer list, I can get a scroll bar here that I can use to navigate in the longer list. Let me see what else we can cover. So we looked at hiding and hiding the ribbon, list of all sheets, navigating, and then jumping cells, selecting cells. Jumping cells would be Control and the arrow keys. Selecting would be Shift and the arrow keys. If you want to select multiple, you will use Control and Shift together. Selecting an entire column will be Control and spacebar. Selecting an entire row will be Shift and spacebar. To zoom in and zoom out on an Excel file, it's a fairly straightforward process. You have the zoom scroll bar at the right bottom corner. If you want to set a custom zoom, you can always click on the percentage symbol here, and you get this box where you can set the custom zoom, right? Something like this. That's too much. I'm going to make it 100%. You can always use the laptop mouse trackpad to pinch in, pinch out, and zoom to whatever level you're working with. Generally, when I'm working, if I'm specifically writing formulas, I ensure that I've zoomed in properly just to ensure that I'm only focused on writing the correct formula. We can also look at freezing panes. In some cases, when you're working with Excel and you want to navigate to the columns that are towards the end, but you would want to retain your first or second columns because you would always want to look at them. For example, in this case, I want to always look at my order ID and my customer ID. So what I can do is I can go to View, and I have an option called Freeze Panes that allows me to freeze a particular section. When I don't click anywhere or select anything, I can come to View, I can come to Freeze Panes, and I can choose this option called Freeze Top Row. What this will do is it will freeze the top row to its position. So when I'm scrolling down, I don't need to be worried about if I'm in the correct column or not. I can always see the column heading at the top. I come back to View. I have another option called Freeze First Column. You can either do one of these at any given point in time. So when you do top row, you can't do first column. When you do first column, you can't do top row. So when I click on first column now, you'll see that when I scroll down, the columns headings or the first row is not frozen, but the first column in this case gets frozen, which is contact title. Actually, that's my bad because I was active on that range. So I'm going to come back to my first column here, View, and do freeze first column. So it freezes the first column before my active cell. This way I navigate, I can always see order ID. If I want to set a custom freeze, which is if I am on B2, I want to freeze everything above my active cell and to the left of my active cell, I can go back to View, first unfreeze panes to remove any freezing, and then freeze panes. Freeze panes keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the worksheet scrolls based on current selection. So when I do that, because I was on B2, everything above B2, which is the first row, and to the left, which is the first column, gets frozen this way. And I'm able to easily navigate my dataset while identifying which column I am on and what row order or what order ID I'm looking at currently. Then you have certain basics like sorting and filtering. To sort and filter data in Excel, so I'm going to remove the freezing for now. So come back to View, Freeze, and Unfreeze panes. To apply a filter, you can always go to Data, and you have the filter option right here. You can disable it, you can come back to Data, and you can enable it as well. The shortcut to apply a filter, as with all the ribbon shortcuts, you will have to always start with Alt. Then you will get a letter for each tab, Home, Insert, etc. I want to go to the Data tab, so I can press A. I want to apply a filter, so I can press T. So the shortcut to apply a filter is Alt, then A, and then T. Don't press them together, press them one by one. Once I've applied a filter, and if I want to look at a particular column, for example, the order ID column, I want to look at order IDs above a certain range, below a certain range, below a certain threshold, I can always click on this drop down and I can do that. But if I don't want to use my mouse to do this, I can use Alt down arrow key. That will give me a list of all the options in the filter drop down. I can sort my data. I can sort by color if that is the case. I can set the sheet view. I can apply number filters, look at orders equal to a specific order, greater than, less than, etc. I can also manually, again, I'm just using my arrow keys here. I can also manually click on my spacebar, select a set of order IDs, and then press tab to come to OK and press enter, and it will only show me those selected order IDs. When I want to clear the current selection but not remove filter from every column, I will use Alt A and then C. Allows me to clear filters while retaining my drop downs. On the text column, you will have certain text filters. Everything else remains same, which is sort ascending or descending, sort by color, and the normal selection using the space bar. You press the space bar and select. I have text filters where I can set values equal to, does not equal, begins with, ends with, contains, does not contains, or anything custom. I don't have a date column here unfortunately, but if I were on a date column, these are the filters that I will get. Generally, when Excel understands that the values in the cells are dates, Excel will show a hierarchy. In date filters, you get all these filters listed here. With dates, Excel is a little tricky because sometimes dates are not captured correctly when they are inputted out of systems. So if I were to just add a date column here for reference, so I'm just going to put today's date. Rather, I'm just going to generate a sequence of dates. So I'm just creating a dummy sequence of dates. That's not working, that's okay. So I'm just going to write today, and I'm just going to do a +1 and then double click to drag the formula down. When I have dates here, I can click on this drop down and you will see that it is creating a date hierarchy, which means Excel is able to understand that these are dates. Now, in some cases, Excel does not understand the dates correctly, so it considers them to be just text values. So I'll show you in another example how you can rectify those. After filtering, then we have text filters that we discussed, number filters. There is something called as custom sort, which is if I want to sort by one particular column. For example, if I were to sort by, let's say, oh, I have date here, by the way. Yeah. If I were to sort, let's say, by my unit price in a smallest to largest fashion, it sorts not just that column, every other column. Which column have I sorted by currently? You can see the small arrow appearing beside in the filter dropdown for current unit price. That is how I know which column I've currently sorted by. If I want to do a custom sort, which is sort by multiple columns, I can go to data, I can go to sort, click on this drop down, and I can add levels. For example, first, if I, let's say, want to sort by my, let's say, order ID, smallest to largest, or let's say largest to smallest, which is the most recent order ID first. Then let's say I want to sort by company name, for example, which is right here, and A to Z. When I click OK, what we'll do is within every order ID, so I am on the first order ID right now. I can delete this date column for now. So you see 265, 264, 264, 263. In 263, for example, the ones that I'm currently highlighting, if I come to the company name column right here, because we only have one value, it is showing it that way. But if you had multiple values, it would sort them in descending order. So when you apply custom sorting, the hierarchy is maintained, which is sort by column 1, then by federal shipping, then by something else, right? That is how the order of sorting works. Perfect. Then you can group columns as well in Excel, mostly used in financial data sets for grouping. And then you have group sheets, which again you can do if you want to format multiple sheets together. For example, in blank 1, blank 2, and blank 3, if I want to apply the same set of formatting, let's say for the first few cells, I can select the first sheet, press Ctrl and select the other two sheets. That allows me to select all the three. If I set the zoom level at 150, or let's say 200, and press OK, in all the three sheets, the zoom level is going to be 200. If I add a color in the very first cell, let's say as a sample formatting, I can right click and I can ungroup. Now each of these sheets will have the same zoom level and the same formatting. I can also write a formula that can be replicated across all the grouped sheets. Control to select one by one, right click to ungroup, and if you want to select multiple, like from the first to the last, I can choose the first one, press and hold my shift key, and then click on the last one. That will select every sheet in between as well. Right now I only have one. If I have additional, it can do that as well. Right click and ungroup. If I want to add another sheet, I can click on this plus icon here, or I can use the shortcut Shift F11. Shift F11 will add more sheets, as you can see at the bottom right here. Shift plus F11. So I've added all these sheets. Shift F11 will add one sheet at a time. I'm just going to select and delete them for now because these are dummy sheets and we don't need them. Right click and delete. That brings us to the end of basic navigation in Excel. I'm just going to close the file. I'm going to close the PowerPoint for now. And let me see if we have some other example in the other sheet. Okay, this is for custom sort and filter. I've already covered that. And I think the last one is for grouping sheets, which also I've already covered for all of you, right? So you can just select the first sheet, select the last sheet, and then whatever zoom level you set, that zoom level gets set across all the sheets. And if you apply certain formatting, for example, if I go to view and I remove these grid lines, if I highlight everything and I apply a border by going to home, border, and all border, let's say I color the first cell, first row, I right click, I ungroup from the first sheet where I started selecting from. Now all the three sheets will have the same zoom level and the same formatting, right? And whatever values I write in those particular cells, the values can also be replicated across all the three sheets. That brings me to the end of basic navigation. Then we looked at data cleaning and preparation. In data cleaning and preparation, we have multiple examples again. Again, every folder has a dedicated PowerPoint. I'll show you the very first example. So 3.1, and in 3.1, I'm just going to remove these additional sets of values from the earlier example. I have this data set where in one column I have my, let's say, shipping mode, a customer or product ID, and I have the vendor or customer name. I need to ensure that I want to split this data. There are two methods. I can either use a formula like text after, text before, etc. to split, but without formulas, how can you do it? So one method is using text to columns. For text to columns to work, you will have to first, from your first cell, Control Shift down to select everything. Come to the Data tab and choose the text to columns option. The shortcut is Alt, then A, and then E to open the text to column window. In most cases, there will be a delimited um, type of data that you have, which is data being separated by a character. Like in this case, we have an underscore between the three fields that we want to extract right here. Right? Excel is smart enough to identify that. So Alt AE to open text to column, that is step one. You choose delimited or fixed width. In most cases, Excel will automatically choose this for you. Then we have the delimiters. I don't need the tab, I don't need the semicolon. I have an underscore, so I will have to choose other and put the underscore here this way. And then I can click on next. When I put the underscore, you can see my database being split into three separate columns. When I click next, I have certain options here. In some cases, I don't want to lose out on my original data. And right now, if you look at the destination, it has B2, which means the data is going to get pasted from B2. I don't want to do that. I want to come to destination, right click, make it C2 as I saw it changed here. And that is where I want the output to come from. So I want my original data to remain as it is. If you want to override it, you can stick with the base default. I can decide if I want all columns or if I want specific columns. For example, for some reason, if I don't want the order ID, I only want the shipping mode and the vendor name, I can click on that particular column and choose do not import skip column. Sorry, do not import column or skip. When you choose that, the header gets renamed to skip column which means this column will not be imported, only the first and the third column will be imported. You can click on finish and the output is right in front of you. Only two columns are imported, not any other one. What you can also do is you can use a technique called flash fill. Again, text to columns is very useful, but it has multiple steps. Flash fill is a very straightforward method where when I give a sample, it is able to extract information from me from this dataset. Flash fill only works to the left or the right of the current selection. I can run it only on one column at a time. How does it work? I can give a sample from any row. So from the second till the 21st row, I can give a sample. Let's say I give a sample from row number 5. I need to ensure that the spelling or the sample matches exactly as the value in the row. I can't make a spelling error here. I can keep my active cell inside this column. If it is outside, it will not work. My active cell has to be inside this range. So from row 2 till row 21, anywhere I can keep it, and I can press Ctrl plus E. That is the shortcut for flash fill. As you can see here, you can either come and click on this button, or you can simply press Ctrl E. When you do that, all the values get extracted. Now that I have extracted the first set of values, I can extract the second set of values in the adjacent column, because now I don't have a blank column in between. So I'm just going to copy and now give a sample from the, let's say, first row. I select, come back, enter, and then Control E, and it gives me the output. Similarly, if I want to extract the name to the left, I can highlight the name. I can paste the name here. Again, you can give a sample from any row. Right now, my data has a clear delimiter in most cases, which is an underscore. If your data has multiple delimiters or is having a varying pattern, in that case, what you will do is you will ensure that you give multiple samples. So for example, before pressing Ctrl E, I will ensure that I give a variety of samples. So I'll take this one, I'll paste it here. Let's say 2 samples in this case. Ideally, 3 to 4 samples are enough if you have very scattered or very unstructured data. Once I do that, I can press Ctrl E and I can get the output right here. That is how flash fill works. Let's look at the next set of examples that we covered. These are more examples on flash fill. So for example, if I want to extract the first 3 letters, I can write the first 3 letters, press Ctrl E and it gives me that. Flash fill is not dynamic, which means if I extract something, if I delete the original value, it does not have an impact on the output. It does not generate a formula. There is no limit on number of rows. If I were to run flash fill on this, which has 9,15,000 rows, flash fill would still work. Remember, if there is a blank column in between, flash fill will not work. So here, if I write the sample and press Ctrl E, flash fill does not work because it says that we looked at all the data next to your selection and did not see a pattern for filling in values for you. So flash fill works immediately to the left or to the right column, which is the adjacent columns. You can not just extract, you can add characters also with flash fill. So for example, if I can just show you a different selection. Okay, not this one. Let me just take a different example here, merging. Okay, so I've shown you how to split. I can also merge data. So I have Aaron and Bergman, 2 separate columns. Without a formula, I can write my sample. So Aaron, Bergman. I can give a sample from another row as well. Let's say Adam, Hart, and press enter, and it will give me the correct output. Now in some cases, if I just write Aaron here, now Aaron is mentioned multiple times, but the last name is different, which means these are different people. But since I've only mentioned Aaron, it will extract from the first column for me. If I have values like this, for example, here, if I have same values in both cases and I want output from a particular column, I will have to ensure that I specify which column I want the output from. So here, if I say furniture from the first column, first 3 letters, first row, Control E, it is extracting from the first column. That is default because in both cases FUR is mentioned, right? So it is not able to identify whether it should go with the first or the second. So the default is always first. If I want output from the second column, my sample should not come from the row where both the values are same. It should come from a row where both the values are different. For example, here column 1 has technology and here column 2 has furniture. Now when I get the sample FUR here and press Ctrl E, that is going to extract only from the second column. You can also separate numbers and text. So I can have the number here and I can have the text here and press Ctrl E on the first column, then Ctrl E on the second column, and I can get the output. In cases where there is no clear pattern, in that case, like I said, you will have to give a variety of samples. So I'm giving one sample from the row, where output is after the name. I'm giving one sample from the row where the numbers are before and after the name. So 2, 3, 4, 4, 8. I have to keep my active cell inside the range, which is from the first row till the last row, anywhere. Control E, and it will extract the output for me. Now, in some cases, it has not been able to do that because I've covered examples where, or I covered patterns where the name is before and after, only after, but I haven't covered a sample where the name is before. In that case, if I give a sample from this row, so right here, 3709, 3709, not 2, and press Control E, I should get the correct output. Similarly here, if I give a sample from this row and the last row, and I keep my active cell inside anywhere, Control E, it will extract the correct names for me. In some cases, you will see that it has only extracted one name because the samples that I gave had only one name. If I want to extract two names, my sample should come from a row where there are two names present. For example, here, Adam and Sandler. I press Control E, and there is a higher chance of me getting the correct output. Again, some minor variations will be there. So you just have to ensure that your sample covers all the variety. Obviously, when you're working on a large data set, and you should be able to work closely with Flashfill and get good output. Then there were some text functions which we were not able to cover during the session given the paucity of time. But if you want to practice these, the solution file is right there, 3.3, and you can practice from the solution file. Right? These are simple left, right, mid functions that you can utilize to separate data from the starting position for using left and from the end by using right. Then we moved on to conditional statements, which we did using generative AI, but I'll just demonstrate the examples before moving ahead. So fairly straightforward, nothing very complex, a very basic if. I want to validate which employees are eligible for a promotion. I have the target, I have the achievement. My logic is going to be simple, that the achievement is greater than equal to target. That's going to be my logic. To write that, I can simply say equal to achievement greater than equal to target. I get true or false. But I don't want to keep it at true or false. I want to ensure that I am getting a default value. In that case, what I need to do is I need to use an if function, if, press tab to complete. 3 arguments. The first is the logical test, which I have already constructed here. Value of true, eligible, always text inside double quotes close, comma, value false, not eligible. So double quotes, not eligible, and close the parentheses. And you can drag the formula down by simply Control Shift down and then Control D to copy the formula down. In the next example, we have two conditions. So I want the achievement to be greater than equal to the target, but I also want the employee to have a full-time employee, which means it should be Y. So one condition that I have to check for is this equal to Y, and the other condition that I have to check for is achievement is greater than equal to target. But when I do it this way, it won't work because Excel does not understand this kind of reference. So what do I do in this case? I use an AND function. Because I want both my conditions to be true, I can wrap them inside an AND. It's fairly simple. You have multiple logics and you can supply as many as you want. I have two, hence I'm supplying two. After an argument, you can always put spaces to ensure that the formula becomes much more readable. I'll be showing some more examples of this when we write slightly longer or complex formulas. I can press enter and I'll get the correct result. True or false. If I again want to display a custom value, in that case what I do is I come back to the starting position if this entire thing becomes my logical test, because in an if statement you can supply only one logical test, but when I use an AND inside the logical test argument, I can supply more than 200 logical tests. You would never need more than 5, 6, 7, comma, eligible, E for eligible and NE for not eligible, close the parentheses, and I get this output. And you can clearly validate that in cases where both the conditions are meeting, you will get an E. Anywhere where only one condition is meeting, you will not get an E. For example, for Craig Ritter, 169 is the achievement, 168 was the target, condition 1 has been satisfied, but condition 2 has not been satisfied, hence you get not eligible. This is slightly, not a complex one, but a slightly different example where there are multiple parameters or multiple conditions, to be honest. So I have achievement and target, I have full-time employee, and I also want to ensure that the experience is at least 5 years. So the problem statement is given here, which employees are eligible for a promotion. One of the conditions has to be met. When it's categorically says one of the conditions has to be met, you always have to use an OR function, because if there are 10, I want one to be true, I will have to use an OR, because when I use an AND, I want every condition to be true, which is not the case in this scenario. So I click on, so I need to have the OR function. What condition do I need to have? The experience should at least be 5 years. So I'm going to say F3 is greater than equal to 5, because it says not greater than at least 5 years. Put a comma. My second logical test, which is mentioned here, condition 2, is on the basis of achievement and job role. Achievement should at least be 100% and should be a permanent employee. So there are two conditions. Condition 1 is on basis of experience. Condition 2 is on the basis of two sub-conditions, which is achievement and permanent employee. So these are not all going to be supplied here. I will have to use an AND to satisfy the second condition, because condition 2 to be true requires two conditions to be true. I'm going to say my full-time employee status is yes, and my achievement should be greater than equal to my target. So either this or this should be true. I'm going to close the parentheses, press enter, I get a true or false. Again, if I want to display a custom value, I will say if this entire thing now becomes my logical test, comma. If your formula is getting slightly longer, you can break it down into multiple lines by pressing Alt Enter. After an argument, press Alt Enter. Eligible for E and NE for not eligible. Close your parentheses and you will get the result. Now in this case, we have a second condition that in case an employee is eligible, right? In case an employee is eligible, I want to give them a 20% incentive value, but my incentive should be capped at a ceiling of 20, which means that if I were to just calculate achievement on all of this, so 0.2, I have different achievement levels. Now, row number 5 and row number 7 will not get incentives. They should just have the word NE mentioned because they're not eligible. For row number 3, 4 and 6, I need to ensure that the maximum incentive that I can give is 20, which means if they have gotten above 20, I can cap it to 20, and if they've gotten 15 in this case, I will only give them 15, I will not raise it to 20. How do I do that? I need to ensure that in my arguments, the logical test remains the same. Value of false remains same, that if they are not eligible, I should mention any, but value of true, which means if they're eligible, I want to get the minimum of either 20 or 0.2, 20% of the achievement value. So minimum takes in multiple numbers and gives you the minimum as the output. My first number is 20. My second number is the 20% of the achievement value, and that makes my formula complete now, which means that in case the employee is eligible, which is the value of true argument, then they will get 20 or less than 20, whichever is their actual achievement. If they exceed 20, it will show 20 itself. There's a slight error in my formula. Let's check that. So I have if, I have or, I have minimum. Okay, so value of true will be minimum of 20, and let me wrap that inside a bracket. I think that will work. It's still an error. Let's check that. So I can say D3 into 20%. Will that work? Okay, I'm still getting an error. I am not sure why. Let me just break the formula down into multiple lines. Copy this. Everything remains same. And I want to say that if the value is true, they want to display the minimum of 20 or 20% of D3. I can close my parentheses. I can come to the next argument with value is false. Just enter and I get the result. Not sure what error I was making, maybe a comma here and there. I can drag the formula down and you will see that everyone gets a maximum of 20. In this case, it should show 15. Oh, sorry, not 20, but rather 20%. My bad. So 20%, not the actual 20 value. So we'll get 15.2 here in this case. Then there are examples around using if and or the same example, constructing it using let. That's a slightly advanced function. You can look at the solution in the right folder. Then the next one is VLOOKUP, where we touched upon the basic VLOOKUP. So I'm going to open that file for now. And in this example, I am going to cover a basic VLOOKUP. I'm just going to delete the output that I had created earlier and come back. Okay. I have a simple data set here for different banks, their states, the number of branches, and the number of staff. For certain banks, I want to retrieve the number of branches. So I'm going to start by writing a VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP has 4 arguments: lookup value, which is the value that I'm searching for; table array, which is from where do I want to extract the value and where do I want to search the value from; column index number, which column of the table array do I want the output from; and then range lookup, which is non-mandatory argument because it is mentioned in square brackets, right? So where most true or false arguments are non-mandatory, but there is always a default value that gets picked up. In a VLOOKUP, the default value is true, which means if I don't specify the last argument, the formula will assume itself to be true. In most cases, I want an exact match, so it is mandatory for me to write false or 0, or else I'll get an incorrect result. So I'm going to start by writing my lookup value, which is B3 in this case, put a comma, select my table array. There are two methods of selecting the table array. Either you select the data like this, control backspace to come back to the formula cell, and then press function F4 to freeze it. Because my data is from row number 2 till row number 32 of column H, I need to ensure that my table does not shift. Excel by default has a relative reference, so if I don't apply dollar signs, my range will shift. The other method is I can select the entire column, which is E2H, put a comma, specify my column index number. Column E becomes column 1, state becomes column 2, number of branches becomes column 3. So I specify 3 here, put a comma, and write a 0. You can write 0 or false, it's one and the same thing. Close the parentheses, press enter, and you will get the correct result. You can drag the formula down. Now in this case, when I select E to H, that is the entire column in my table array, I don't need to worry about freezing the ranges because I'm dragging down, the column position will not shift. That's a basic example of a VLOOKUP with a false. If you want to look at a VLOOKUP with a true, which is the other argument for the last range lookup argument, other value, so you can always use it on a slab wise data where you're generally searching for value between two slabs. So for example here, 0 would be no tier, 100 would be A, 105 would be B, and 110 would be C. But it also means that if I'm searching for 102, 102 will fall between 100 and 105, so I will get A for that. So this is the general logic for this, is that you should have your data in a greater than equal to order. So anything equal to 0 or greater than 0 will be no tier, but less than 100, so greater than 100 or equal to 100 would be A, greater than or equal to 105 would be B, and anything above 110 or equal to 110 would be C. You write the formula in the same way, so this becomes my lookup value, this becomes my table array. I'm selecting the entire thing in order to eliminate applying dollar signs, put a comma, column index number is going to be 2, and the last argument will be true or 1. That's one and the same thing. You press enter and you'll get the correct result. If I write 110, I'll get C. If it is above 110, it remains C. If it is less than 100, which is the first row, it becomes no tier, as you can see here. So that's a basic VLOOKUP with true and a basic VLOOKUP with false. Then we looked at some functions, which is maybe this, COUNTIF and SUMIF. So I have data here for different mutual funds. To be specific, I have around, I think, 247 mutual funds. I want to do a simple count statement. So I'm using COUNTIF here. I'm going to do this example where I have two criteria. I want to count the riskometer is high. So in column V, I have different risk values: high, low, low to moderate, moderately high, and very high. I want to count every row or every fund which has the value high, and I also want to count every fund which has 10-year SIP returns greater than 10, which is column number S. I can start by writing my formula. I'll say equal to count if S. My criteria range 1 becomes the riskometer column. I can either choose the entire column or choose that specified range of cells. When I choose a range of cells in my other argument, which is my criteria range 2, I cannot select entire column. I will have to choose specified range of cells. My criteria is high in this case. Put a comma. Criteria range 2 is going to come from column S. Select the entire column. Control backspace, comma. Now, when I specify Z8 as my criteria, I have created a drop down list here, which I'll show you in a second. But I want Z8 to be equal. So whatever value I'm able to find in the first range or first criteria range, it should be equal to Z8. Now in the second scenario, I don't want values to be equal to 10. So when I say Z9 like this, it means I'm searching for values equal to 10 in the second criteria range, which is the 10-year SIP return column. But my logic is I want greater than 10, not equal to 10. So in that case, what you have to do is put double quotes, oh, greater than sign, double quotes, and cell reference. You are able to concatenate these together. If you want greater than equal to, you can write greater than equal to. In this case, I just want greater than, press enter and get the result. If I come to my Z8 cell, click on this drop down, I change the drop down, it changes the value. I change the drop down, it changes the value. If I write 5 or 1 here, I get 45. If I write 4, if I write 5, I get different result. If I write 7, I get a different result. So these are generally AND conditions. Similarly, you have a sum if as well, where if I can apply the same formula that we did earlier, so equal to sum if. Sum if, the only advantages is that you are able to count, you are able to add up a value from a column. Sum ifs, the first argument is sum range. Let's say I want to sum up the 3-year SIP return column as mentioned in the problem statement, which is this one. Control shift down, control backspace to come back to the formula, comma. Risk parameter is high, so select the risk parameter column and specify the cell, which is this, comma. 10-year SIP return should be greater than 10, so column S. Select the range, control backspace to come back to the formula cell, double quotes, greater than, double quotes, ampersand, and the cell reference. I'm just going to space this out a little so that it is more easy to read. Same logic as earlier, only thing is I'm using a sum if S, which means I want to sum up values from a column wherever these two criteria match, for whichever rows these two criteria are able to match. Press enter and you get the correct result. That's the second example for a basic count if S and a basic sum if S. That brings me to the last part, which is generative AI, which I will cover together towards the end of the session. That's a quick recap of session 1, which was introduction to basic Excel, like a efficiency enhancement, covering some basic functions and formulas, and also looking at shortcuts and tips and tricks. In session 2, we covered slightly more different variations or slightly complex variations for a VLOOKUP, which was in this file, where I was identifying, okay, from here. I'm just going to clean up the values from earlier because I am working on OneDrive. Whatever solutions I created earlier are saved here. Now, I'm just going to ensure that I remove these old values from here. Perfect. Before I start with the example, I'm just going to clean that as well, remove that, and data validation, and clear it from there. Okay, not remove duplicates. Data validation, clear. Okay, remove the screenshot. I think that's enough for now. Perfect. So in the earlier VLOOKUP example, you were working with a larger data set, a smaller data set of this larger data set, which has now around 19 columns and I think 30 or 29 rows, excluding the header. So 28 rows. Oh no, actually in this case it is 30 rows because I have one blank row and one header row. What I want to do is I want to do the VLOOKUP on the next sheet, but I want to ensure that I don't go ahead and move to the other sheet while doing a VLOOKUP, which is fairly simple, but generally what users do is they will start writing a VLOOKUP, choose your lookup value. Now my table array is on the other sheet. So I'll come back to the database sheet. My table array will start from column C, although I have some data in column B. That cannot be my table array. Reason is the VLOOKUP only searches for the value in the first column. So if I'm searching for the bank name, I cannot search for it in column B. I have to start from column C. I have column C to column U, so I'm just going to write that manually for now. I specify the column index number In this case, I want output from reserves and funds column, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the sixth column, comma, 0. That is how a user would generally write the formula. They press enter, they get the result, they drag their formula down, happy, good to go. How can you improve this? How can you refine this? Firstly, when you select a range or a reference from a different sheet, what happens is the sheet name appears in the formula. Once the sheet name appears in the formula, there's nothing wrong with it. That is how Excel is able to understand where that C colon U is coming from, but it just makes the formula not very legible. You can use something called as named ranges, which allow you to, this is the generic method. You can use named ranges, which allow you to extract data by specifying or giving them names. I will come back to my database sheet. I will select everything from C2, Control Shift right, till U2, and then Control Shift down till row number 32. Control backspace to come back to the top. Once I have selected all my data, I can click in this option called the name box over here. When I click in the name box, I can give this selected range a name. My range starts from C2 till U32. I could have selected it this way, or I could select the entire column as well. If you feel that more values will get added tomorrow, select the entire column. If you feel your range is going to be fixed, select the range. I click in the name box, I give this name, I call this bank underscore data. You cannot put a space here, right? In the name box, you're not allowed to put spaces, and that it will not accept a space. If you have to use two words, you can either write them this way, where you make the first letter uppercase, or you can put an underscore this way as well. When I press enter, I will not click outside, I will press enter for the name to be saved. Where can I see what name I have given? I can go to formulas, I can go to name manager, the shortcut is Control F3, and I can see the list of names that I have given. Right now only one. What does it say? The name is bank data, the values from the column. Again, I can't see all the values because that's going to be a lot of values. And what range does it refer to? It refers to the database sheet right here, C2 to U32 as selected. The scope will always remain the workbook, which is the current context. This name will not exist outside of this workbook in a new file. So if I close this, press Ctrl N, open a blank workbook, go to formulas, name manager, it's going to be blank. Now, once I've given the name to my table array range, I can come back, and where I was mentioning database C2U2, I can just write bank underscore data. It prompts me that I can press tab to complete, press enter, and I get the same result. No change at all. The advantage is I don't have to navigate to the other sheet while writing the formula, makes my formula more legible and more descriptive. How can you enhance this further? Right now, this argument where you have to count the number of columns is still manual. How can you enhance that? How can you make that automated? So we use we use a function called the match function. So I want reserves and funds over there as well as a starting point. Okay, so we use something called the match function. Now, if I were to use the match function in this column, match again is a lookup function, but it tells you the positional value of the value that you're trying to search for. So here, if I say in this cell equal to match, lookup value, let's say is, okay, this is too big a name for me to type it out. I'll just create some dummy data here. If I have a bunch of values here and I say equal to match, search for, let's say H in this list, lookup array, comma 0. Enter, it tells me 3. What does it mean? H is at the third position, 1, 2, and 3. If I were to start selecting from a larger range, if I say from G1, H would not remain 3 because I have two more cells as part of my array. So now I should be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as you can see. So only select the range that has your data, do not select outside of that range. So the match function either works on a horizontal lookup array or a vertical lookup array as well. In this case, what we're going to do is there is one function of VLOOKUP that accepts a positional value, which is the column index number argument. So I'm just going to press Alt Enter to break my formula into multiple lines this way. So I'm on the third argument of VLOOKUP. Just rewriting that. Lookup value, table array is going to be bank underscore data, comma column index number is going to be match. Now, why am I using the match function here? Because column index number accepts a value, match returns the value. So I'm going to search for this header C2. I'm going to freeze it because when I move down, C2 should remain at the same position. C2 cannot shift in my formula. Lookup array. Now I have to come back to my database sheet. I have to select all my headers like this. Because if I'm searching for reserves and funds, I can only search for it in the first row. I can't start from column B because like I showed you, in case of F, in case of finding H, if I start from row 1, 2 cells above where my actual data is, those will also get counted in the final position. I don't want that. In a VLOOKUP plus match, the width of the columns has to remain same. So if your table array starts from column C to column U, your header array for match or lookup array for match will also be at the same position. The only difference is how can I make this more smoother as a process so that I don't have to come to the other sheet. Just going to copy the entire formula, escape, double click, repaste it. What I can do is, rather than going to the database sheet and selecting the first row with the headers, I can come back. I can press Control Shift right from C2 because that is the column of my table array till you come here and give this a name. I can call this headers. Once I do that, I come back to my sheet. I paste my formula, which I had written earlier. Now I can just write headers and I get a prompt for headers. Press tab to complete. 0 for match, comma, close the 0 for VLOOKUP as well. Both match and VLOOKUP zeros have to be closed. Press enter and you have your result right in front of you. Again, if I want to do this or make this more dynamic, in that case, what I can do is I can have a drop down appear here. Now, obviously, since I've made it dynamic, which is it is referencing the column or finding the column position automatically, I don't expect users to come to the data, copy the header and go and paste it there. So how do I make it dynamic for them? I can come to formulas once, go to name manager. I can see the name that I have given to my list of headers from C2 to U2, which is this value, headers. It can be any name that you can give. Just remember, when you create a named range, by going to the name box and typing the name, space is not acceptable. I can now click on the first header cell, C2, go to data validation and choose list. Now, what list do I want to reference? I want a list of my columns, column headings. So I can say equal to headers because that is the name that I have given. Press OK. A drop down appears. Alt down arrow key to open the drop down. Choose whatever column you want and you will get the output like this. Choose whatever column you want and the output shall be displayed to you. Perfect. Now that is the dynamic column number using match. You can have a look at the function one more time. Again, if I want to make this more dynamic, if I have more columns on the right, I can simply use $signs to freeze before I drag my formula. That's a slightly advanced version of VLOOKUP compared to the earlier one. Like for example, in this case, you can, rather than using match, you can hard code the column positions that you want. Again, these are not linked to the headers, so you will exactly need to know which column you're extracting the output from and put that in the heading position. I'm using these curly brackets. 5, 10, and 2 refer to the position of the columns. You can have it in a sequence as well, or you can mismatch the sequence. You can reorder the columns 10, 2, and let's say 15, for example. So it'll give you those as the output. And for the last example, a quick change of plans. I'm just going to copy that for now. So same formula as earlier. The only thing that I've done differently is that, since I have multiple columns in which I've given those drop downs, I have just ensured that I freeze my ranges correctly rather than freezing the entire cell B3, because when I move down, I want different bank names to pick up. So I want B3 to become B4, B5, B6, B7, etc. But when I move to the right, I don't want column B to shift. Hence, I apply $sign before column B. To apply $signs, F4, function F4 to get a cell lock, which is both row and column. Second time when you press the function F4 key, only puts a $sign before the row reference. A third time only puts a $sign before the column reference. A fourth time will not put any $signs. In this case, I want a $sign before the column reference. Similarly, in case of my headers, I cannot freeze C2 entirely because I have two additional headers here. So when I move to right, I want C2 to become D2 and D2 to become E2. But when I move down, I don't want the position of row number 2 to shift, because if row number 2 shifts, then my header is not being searched for and then I will get an incorrect result. So to freeze the row, function F4 one time and then a second time to put a $sign before the row reference. Press enter and you have your result. You can simply highlight, Control R to copy to right. So let me just show that one more time. So I'm on my first cell, highlight, we are using shift and right arrow key. Control R to copy the formula to the right, highlight, shift, down arrow key, control D to copy the formula down. Again, there are a few more examples here that we can go back and explore. Coming to the next part, which is using index plus match. Using index plus match. Now, index plus match is a very interesting function because the VLOOKUP function has a limitation of its own, which is it cannot go left of the lookup column. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. It cannot go left. It can always go right. So, for example, in this case, I have the code, which is my lookup value. I want to find from the code column, but I want to get the output from name of the bank. We use a combination of functions here called index plus match. I'll first show you what the match function is being used for. I want to search for this code in this column, share control spacebar to select the entire column, or you can select the specified range of cells this way. And I want to freeze that in order to ensure that when I drag the formula down, it is able to correctly pick up the values, comma 0 for exact match, and tells me the value. So 172 is at the 10th position. So if I were to just validate that, 172, as you can see, count as 10, which means it is at the 10th position. This way, right? Now, what I need to do is, once I find the row, which is the position, I need to get output from the first column. If I want to go right, a VLOOKUP will work, index match will also work. If I want to go left of the lookup column, I will have to use index match. Now, I have only written the match function. We will use this in combination with a function called index. Now, the index function is very simple. It expects a row. So if I give these 5 values, put a comma, and if I say row number is 2, it'll give me output as Chhattisgarh, because in this selected range from F2 to F6, row number 2 has Chhattisgarh. So I press enter, I get Chhattisgarh. If I select a range of values, which is, let's say, from F2 to, let me do that. So from F2 to, let's say, H5, put a comma. If I say row number 2 and if I say column number 3, so row number 2 is going to be the row for Chhattisgarh. Column number 3, which is the column number reference, is going to be 15. Close the parentheses and I get the answer 15. So I hope you're able to get that the index function from whatever array you have specified basis the row and column position will give you the output. Now, what has match done for me earlier when I had used it to find the position of this code in the column, which is across the rows, it tells me the row number or row position. So I just have to use index before the match, specify my output column, which is this, the name of the bank, put a comma, just alt enter to break it into different lines, and close the parentheses here as well. So what this does is it finds 172 in this list. I have put this in the row number argument of index because I'm only working with one column. If I had multiple columns, I would have to specify column number as well. So right now only row number is being specified, so which means 172 as row 10. So array is F3 to F16. So the formula basically is F3 to F16 comma 10. That is the formula. But I don't want to calculate or hard code that 10. I want to find it basis the position of the code. Press enter and you get your result. Drag it down and you will have your result. I get 0 in some cases. Reason is I have not frozen this output range as well, which is causing an error. I can now get the correct result. For 116, 116 is at the 12th row and the output is going to be Meghalaya, as you can see here. 116 Meghalaya. You can utilize the same concept of named ranges when working with index plus match as well, right? Everything remains same. The only structure is slightly different. Index has the array, then has the row number and the column number argument. Index, row, and column, which is called as index match because you have to use two matches, one to find the column, one to find the row in the column, and one to find the column position for the correct header across the header values. Again, you can go back and explore that in one of the practice files. I'm going to close this, come back out. That was VLOOKUP. We've already covered condition statements earlier and we've already covered functions, so I'm not going to touch upon that, right? I'm going to come to pivot table now, and in pivot table what we can do is we can look at a sample data set that we have available with us. I am just going to delete the additional values that we have and right click and delete. So this is the dashboard that we had created earlier. We'll try to do something similar now. So I have my data set. I am going to ensure that I quickly navigate to see how many rows I have, how many columns I have. So I have around 15 columns, and I have around 51,000 rows approximately. I want to start by inserting a pivot table. Insert, choose pivot table. You don't need to click anywhere special, don't select anything. Just keep your active cell inside your range and it will insert the pivot table for you. Every pivot table column should have a header. Without the header, you will not insert a pivot table. I come to insert, I go to pivot table, I choose from table range, and from here it specifies or selects my entire range. I want to create a pivot table on a new worksheet. I'm going to press OK, and it creates the pivot table on a new worksheet. Perfect. Now, once you've done that, this is just my pivot table field list. I had docked it out. Okay, so this is the default view that you get. Now on the left, I have my pivot table area. If I click outside, the option goes away. If I click inside, I get the option. What options am I talking about? Pivot table analyze and design. Now here, I can, when I have my entire ribbon visible, for example, when I do Control Shift F1 one more time, when I have my entire ribbon visible, you generally have a smaller view with the pivot table, something like this, not as wide. Now you have to scroll to find the column position. So first advantage, freeze your entire ribbon. Control Shift F1, you get a much larger area to work with. Right? In your cases, it'll adjust automatically. Now the other thing that I want to do before moving ahead is I still have to scroll. So I click on this gear icon and choose the second option, field section and area section side by side. From this tools drop down, I can see a list of all my columns together. I can see all my values on the right as well. I want to start by creating a simple pivot table to identify top 5 or top 10 customers. So I can drag my customer name to my rows, my sales to my values. And if I want to sort this data, I will simply right click on any numeric value in the sales column and choose sort largest to smallest. Once I've done that, I can click on this small drop down right here and I can choose value filter, come to the very last one, which is named as top 10. Again, you can specify 5, 10, 15, whatever values you want. I'm going to say 5. This will remain same by sum of sales because that is the only value that I have right now, which is sales. If I had some other value like profit, discount, quantity, I could have chosen those as well. I can press OK and it shows me the top 5 customers for my overall market, overall data basis the selection that I just did, which is top 5 from sales or sum of sales. When you're generally working with a pivot table dashboard, you want to have a cleaner view. So I always like to go to view and remove grid lines. So I have a much cleaner view at the back. This is my top 5 customers. Just gonna put it there. You will always rename pivot tables because after a point you have a lot of pivot tables and you want to identify which table is which. It is better idea to rename them once you create them. So I can come back to pivot table analyze. I'm going to call this one over here in pivot table name field. I'm going to call this top n. Press enter to save that name. Now, if I want to create another pivot table on the same sheet, I can either just copy and paste this pivot table somewhere here or at the bottom, and it'll copy that pivot table for me. Or what I can do is I can always go back to orders compact, which is my original sheet, go to insert, pivot table from table range. Rather than new worksheet, I can say existing worksheet, and I can specify at what point do I want my pivot table to be created. And when I press OK, my pivot table will be created right here. So you can either copy paste or insert, choice is yours. Here I also want to look at my bottom 5 customers. So I'm going to come back to value filter, go to top, and from the top drop down change it to bottom, which is my worst performing customers. I want to make a quick modification, which is, let's say, by profit, not just by sales. I want to remove sales from the second pivot table, come back to the drop down here, go to value filter, top one, I'm going to say bottom 5. So people with the 5 worst profit trends across my data set. Press OK, and these are the 5 all negative. Collectively, these 5 are not contributing any positive inflow for me. These are top 5 customers. These are bottom 5 customers. This is basis profit, and the above is basis sales. Now I need to rename the second pivot table as well. So I'm going to come back and click on the pivot table, come back to the ribbon, pivot table analyze, towards the very left, rename it. I'm going to call this bottom n. The earlier one was called top n. I'm just going to rename that n and make it uppercase. Enter. Now I had inserted this pivot table from my orders compact sheet. Let's say I want to look at a subcategory level analysis. So I can drag my subcategories to my rows. I can drag my sales to my values, and I can drag my sales to my values again, and then again, let's say 3 times. What I can do now is I can first decide if I want to sort my data. So I can always right click, go to sort, and choose if I want to do a custom sorting by whatever column I choose from. I have added sum of sales 3 times, and you can see it says sum of sales 2 and sum of sales 3. This one I want to call total sales. To rename the column heading, either double click on the column and rename it from here, press F2 and rename it from here, or rename it from the formula bar. I'm just going to call this total sales. Once I do that, this remains total sales, no change. In the other two, I want to change the aggregation, which is right click on any value in the second column, which is sum of sales 2, go to summarize value by, and change this to average. So this becomes average sales. Click on the header F2 or from the formula bar, average sales. And my last column is going to be a count of transactions. So right click, summarize value by, choose count, and it shows me number of transactions happened. Now if you see between me changing the calculation, do you see something happening? The column width readjusts automatically every time. Generally, when you're creating a dashboard, you want to have consistent column widths across your pivot table. So in this case, what we're going to do is we can rely on an option in pivot tables where I right click on the pivot table, go to pivot table options right here, and enable this checkbox, which is disable this checkbox, which is auto fit column width. Uncheck this on update, which means if my values in the columns are shifting from a larger character length to a smaller character length or vice versa, the column position will not shift. Press OK. I will just highlight these and manually adjust them for now so that we have the same style. Perfect. And now what I want to do is for the third column, right click, show value as, and I want to make it count. And I want to call this header count of transactions. Hash transactions indicating count of transactions. I can minimize this as well so that I have a much cleaner look. I can rename this pivot table as well. So I can call this subcategory analysis. I can rename the header of the top. This header has nothing to do with the pivot table header. I'm just creating this for my reference. Subcategory analysis. I can also add 2 more values. So I can add sales 1 more time, and I can add sales a 5th time as well. I can right click, go to show value as, and specify max, which is the maximum transaction value. Right click, show value as, and min, which is the minimum transaction value for that particular product. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to call this max amount, and I'll call this min amount, just for easy reference. Within the headings or within the columns, if I want to sort my data or align it in a particular fashion, I can do that as well. Right now, my data is not sorted correctly, so I can simply right click, sort, and either choose largest to smallest or smallest to largest, whichever one I want. But whichever column I choose from that column, that sorting will happen. So if I want to look at the highest transactions in that order, so I right click on the transaction column that I just created, which is nothing but a count. Right click, sort, largest to smallest, and you have something like this. Once I've done this, I can also go ahead and look at a profitability analysis across my subcategories. So I'm going to copy this pivot table and I'm going to paste it right here. I'm going to copy this column width, which is the difference between the first two areas, and I'm going to click here, Control Alt V, and I'm going to paste the column width so I don't have to resize it manually. Now in the second pivot table, right click, pivot table options, just ensure that you auto fit column width is unchecked. For all these columns as well, copy. I'm going to highlight these here, Control Alt V, and paste the column width, which is the width of the columns. We can't make that change, that's okay. Let's do it manually for now. So click on the header, come to home, come to format, look at column width 10.68. Do the same here as well. So I'm going to click highlight, format, column width 10.68, just to ensure consistency. Perfect. Now I don't want to look at sales here. I want to look at profitability. So I want to have my total sales, but rather than showing actual value, what I can do is I can right click. I can go to show value as and choose percentage of column total. which means it is going to tell me how much each subcategory is contributing to overall sales. So I have a clear bifurcation here. And now what I can do is, because earlier I had sorted by count of transaction, I'm just going to rename that, and I'm not going to sort by count of transaction, but rather by sales. Because I'm showing subcategory on the left and on the right, I need to have the same labels. So if I have binders here and accessories here, it's going to confuse the user. So I'm sorting my subcategory analysis, subcategory sales analysis table. I'm going to rename it in the heading as well. So subcategory sales analysis. Perfect. Let's copy the column heading for this as well so that we have consistency. Okay, it does not allow me to do that. So I can just look at the column heading once by going to column width 11.73, highlight the entire column, go to format, column width 11.73, press enter. Perfect. There is the consistency right there. So I have my overall sales. Right click on any one value, go to go to sort and largest to smallest. Obviously, I will have the same sorting on the left and the right, because here also I've sorted by sales and here also I've sorted by total sales as a percentage. I can rename this column as sales contribution. Again, you see that the column width did not get adjusted automatically, which is okay. I can just call it contri for now. That's short for contribution that we can use. I want to look at profit, so I can drag profit to values. I can look at either sum of profit, or I can call it total profit. I can look at average profit, so I can drag profit one more time, right click, show value as, summarize values by an average. So it shows me the average profit. I can click on the column heading and rename it to average profit. So like I've done a calculation here, you can do more calculations in the pivot table. Additionally, now what I want to do is, I want to ensure that I'm just copy this pivot table. Before that, I'm going to rename this table. So this is not subcategory sales, but rather subcategory profit analysis. Now, what I want to do is, I want to highlight the profit column, right? I want to highlight the profit column in a way that I'm able to see some trend or some pattern right here. In that case, what I'm going to do is, I can click on any one cell. I will not select my data. I will click on any one cell, come to home, come to conditional formatting, choose color scales, and choose the second one, which is the highest value will be green and the lowest value will be red. Sorry, the first one. Once I do that, in a pivot table, this is the only correct method of applying conditional formatting. Once you apply conditional formatting on any one cell, ideally I go with the first cell, no reason. Just makes it easier to remember where I started from. Click on this drop down and choose the second one. All cells showing total profit values. But what that does is, it also includes the grand total, which is going to make your results look very skewed, because the grand total will always be much larger, because that is the total of all the values combined. So you can come back, click on the small drop down and choose the third option, which is all cells showing total profit values for subcategory. The grand total does not have a subcategory mentioned. It is the total of all the subcategories. Hence, the third option excludes any total or subtotal from the conditional formatting automatically. And I get this sort of a view where I'm getting a trend or a heat map effect as well. I can do the same for average profit. For now, I can leave it like this. Additionally, what I can do is, I just want to resize this slightly. Perfect. Now, additionally, what I can do is, I can highlight my numbers, and if I want to quickly format them, I can press Ctrl Shift 1. So it highlights them with 2 decimal places and the commas as well. I can do the same thing for this one. Ctrl Shift 1 won't work on that one. Maybe on this one. Ctrl Shift 1 works on this, and I can do it on the total profit column as well. Ctrl Shift 1 works on this as well. Slightly increase the column width. Ideally, all of them should have the same column width, so I'm just going to highlight these and ensure that the column width is 12. I'm going to do the same thing here as well. Come back, format, column width is 12. Perfect. 12 isn't sufficient here, just increase that by a bit. So I'm going to make this maybe 12.2. So format, column width 12.25. That doesn't work, so format, column width, just make it 12.5, and do the same thing here as well. I know formatting takes time, but that is what ensures that your output is of extremely good quality in its first look. rename the table. So copy the header that I've just given here, come back to pivot table analyze and rename this pivot table as well. Press enter. Now you can also do a lot of different groupings as well. For example, what I can do is I can create groupings or buckets for let's say sales or maybe transactions, right? We can do that as well. So just to show you what you can do is I can just copy the pivot table. I'm going to position the pivot table right here and I'm going to rename that to something else later. But for now, from this pivot table, I want to remove profit and I want to remove customer name and I want to add my sales amount to my rows, not to my values. When I add sales to values, it aggregates. When I add sales to rows, it'll show me every distinct transaction value that has happened. So there might be transactions that have happened for a particular amount multiple times, but this shows me every unique transaction value. What I can do now is, because I don't want to look at my sales this way, I can right click and choose group. When I do that, it automatically identifies certain grouping and is grouping it by 1000. I can press OK and it creates these groups for me. Now, not the most efficient method of grouping, which is the default one. So you can always right click, go to group, and I can say that I want to start with 0 and I want to, so my maximum value is 22,638. Let's say I want to start close at 25,000 and I'm going to create intervals of 5,000. That makes it much more cleaner and much more easier to work with. So I will have something like this. So I can look at transactions between 0 to 5,000. What is the total value of those transactions? So I can now add sales to my values. It'll show me count, but I can always right click and go to value field setting and change this to sum. This is the same as doing a right click here and going to show value as, sorry, summarize value by and changing it to sum. You can clearly see that there is a pattern here, which is that, again, one small adjustment. When I do Control Shift F1, Control Shift 1, you will see that the column widths are adjusting because for this one, I did not right click, go to pivot table option and disable this auto fit column width. I'm just going to make everything the same. So that's going to be 12.5 column width, 12.5 points, and that works perfectly fine. Control Shift 1 to format the numbers. Maximum sales comes from transactions or ticket size of less than 5,000, which means customers are spending less than 5,000. That is where my maximum overall sales comes from as at a transaction level. I can look at number of transactions as well. For that, I can just put again sales only. I can then right click. It shows me the count of sales between 20 to 25,000. There's only one transaction, which clearly shows that the high ticket purchases are not that frequent. Customers are purchasing in lower average order values or average cart values. Rather than count of sales, I can say hash transactions. Now, I might have this column already somewhere else, which is maybe here, right? But in some cases, it does not allow you to rename the column. So you can just put a space after it if two columns have the same name. What I can also look at is maybe number of customers in this. So I can click on the drop down here and I can look at the number of customers, but that is not going to show me the unique customers. It is going to show me distinct customers itself. Sorry, not that pivot table on this one. So I hope I haven't added customers there. Let me just remove that if I have. I haven't. Come back to my smaller pivot table here. If I add customer name, it shows me the exact same because there's not going to give me a unique count of customers. If I want a unique count of customers, there's a slightly different approach, but we're not going to go into that for now. I can maybe put the, let's say, segment in my columns. What that will allow me to see is within each customer segment, like B2B, B2C, what are the overall sales and the transaction trends. So I can drag segment and bring it to my columns above the values field, and I will get something like this. Again, feels like a lot. What you can do is to summarize or make it slightly easier to digest, go to pivot table analyze, turn off field headers. So you will get rid of those additional rows, turn off buttons, and obviously you can hide the field list, which is on the right here. You can enable and disable it as required. If I don't want to look at overall value, I can always come to design, come to grand total and say, I want only grand total for my columns. So I will not have those additional grand totals at the end. Now what is happening here is I have this extra column here. If I expand this, I get something like this. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave my, get my field list back, and I'm going to leave my sum of sales there. I don't want my transactions. So I'm going to remove transactions from there, and I will have something like this. And on the right hand side here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this pivot table, and on the right hand side here at the same position, but starting from here, I'm going to remove sales, or I'm going to keep sales rather, right click, go to value field settings and choose count. Press OK, and I get the count of transactions. Rather than count of sales, you can call it count of transactions. You can always rename it as hash representing count. Perfect. I can see a clear pattern. Within, there's only one large ticket item purchased or a transaction between above 20,000 and less than 25. That is in the home office segment. Most corporate purchases have been below 5,000. If you want to not just look at the trend like this, just the actual number, you can always right click and change the view, which means that I can right click, I can go to show value as, and I have certain calculations here. For example, if I do a percentage of column total right now, what will show me is that within the consumer segment, which ticket sizes have contributed to the overall sales. Within corporate, what have done that? Within home office, what have done that? So I'll show that example on a different data set maybe. But for now, we're going to be concluding with the pivot table example. One last tip, wherever you have empty values, if you want to hide those empty values and show something else, you can do that. So pivot table field options, you have an option called for empty values show. So let's say I put two dashes, press OK, and the two dashes appear in the empty cells. Similarly, right click and go to pivot table options. I can put two dashes just for consistency. I can ensure that all my numbers are at the center, all my headers are at the center. Simple center alignment, Alt H A C, highlight, Alt H A and C. That's it. Now I want to add a slicer to ensure that I'm able to interact with these pivot tables. But before that, I want to give a quick name to the pivot table. So I'm going to rename this as sales grouping by segment. And I'm going to come back here. I'm going to call this count of transactions by grouped sales for each segment. I'm going to quickly rename these pivot tables as well. So pivot table analyze, come to the left here, sales group, come back to this one, pivot table analyze, it's going to be sales group count. Whatever you want and whatever is easy for you to remember. Close this, Control Shift F1. This is what my view looks like as of now. I want to add a quick slicer on the maybe the bottom here or somewhere on the here on the side. What I can do right now is I can just move my pivot table slightly downwards like this, or maybe furthermore. Okay, perfect. What I can do is I can have a few slicers here. So right now I'm seeing data for all the years. What I can do is I can go to pivot table, click on any one of these pivot tables, go to pivot table analyze, go to insert slicer. Now since I've already added my segment, or one second, this is category or segment. Let me just check that. Okay, I wanted to add my category here, not my segment. So I'm going to remove segment and I'm going to quickly put category. Same thing I'm going to do here, remove segment and put category. Reason is I'm using subcategories in one of my earlier tables, so I cannot have subcategory in my slicer. It's going to cut down my view here. So just rename this to category and rename this to category as well. Perfect. Now over here I want to have my slicers, and at the top I would want to have a title as well. So what I'm going to do right now is, again, I'm not doing any charts as of now. That will be doing in a separate example. I want to insert a slicer from the first pivot table. You can do it from any one. Go to pivot table analyze, go to insert slicer, and I want to create a slicer for my business segment. I create a slicer like this. You can right click, go to slicer settings, and what I can do is I don't want to display the slicer header, which is the word segment, and I can simply click OK. So I will have a very cleaner look with me. I can always go back to slicer tab at the top after choosing the slicer and choose a much more consistent or cleaner design. I'm going to go with the gray one for now, and I'm going to bring this right here. Again, when you're working with a object on the sheet, what happens is that when I click on view and I choose grid lines, you will see that it is not getting aligned properly. So what you can do is, you can, while moving the object, you can press Alt and it will snap to grid automatically. I can minimize the width of this as well, and not so much, maybe that is okay. Perfect. I'm going to come back and remove grid lines. Right now the slicer only interacts with the first pivot table. Reason is I had created it only from the first pivot table. So when I click on the slicer right now, it only changes the first pivot table. And it is changing. Let me just quickly right click and check if I have disabled. Okay, auto fit column width was not disabled for the first one. So I just disabled that, and I can change this to be a 12.5 column width as well. So column width will be 12.5, and perfect. So now when I choose, it only filters the first pivot table because that is from where I had created this. Okay. Now I can always right click on the slicer and I can go to slicer settings. Sorry, not slicer settings, but rather right click, go to report connections. And in report connections, I can see a list of all my pivot tables. Now my current pivot table is this one. These are from a different sheet. So this is my current pivot table. I have sales group count, subcategory profit, and top N. I have bottom N as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 pivot tables. I have chosen all of them. I press OK, and I can always right click. I want to have a multi-select option. In fact, if I can just enable my slicer headings and press OK, I will get this multi-select option as well. So what you can do is, now I can clear my filter from here. As long as multi-select is enabled, it means that all the three values are selected. In fact, the color is causing slight confusion, so come back to slicer and choose the default blue one. Yeah, maybe that makes it better. So right now I've only chosen home office, only chosen corporate. If I want to select multiple, I can press Control and do that like this. If I want to use the multi-select option, it means all of them are selected by default. I can uncheck any one of them. And when I click, I don't need to use Control because multi-select is enabled. I need to check one last thing. So pivot table option, that is okay. Right click, pivot table option, that's okay. Right click, pivot table option, that's okay. Right click, pivot table option, right here. Okay, so you have to do this while you're working, so it makes it easier and you don't have to come back and do it again and again. Right, so a quick formatting for this one, column width and 12.5. Perfect. Now when I do it, I don't think anything is going to get hidden. Perfect. I have a few rows going up and down, but that's okay because there are no transactions below that in that particular segment, hence we're seeing that. Clear the filter, click outside, and you have this. So that's a quick view for analyzing a pivot table in Excel, multiple items that we've created right in front of us. I would like to show you one more thing in the pivot table. So this is during class, and this is the recap. I'm just going to position them on the right. I'm going to click on orders compact. I'm going to come back to insert and I'm going to insert a new pivot table. I want to show you a quick technique, which is if I have, let's say, 5 markets, I'm going to put them in rows, put the sales here, put the segment in columns. Right click on the sales, change it to sum for now for this example. Now what I can do is I can create a separate sheet for different views. Right now this is the view that I have on my screen, market and segment. Let's say I want to create different views for category. So I can choose category, I can drop it in filters. When I do that, category will be visible here at the top. Filters and slices are different, like I've covered. Slices are movable as on the screen, clickable. Filters are like a filter drop down. So you'll have to enable this, choose whichever option you want. Now, if I have 3 categories and I want to create 3 separate sheets for each category for the filter data, what I can do is I can come to pivot table analyze, come to this options drop down right here, and then click on this option called show report filter pages. Whatever field I have in my filters, which is category right now, and I click OK, what it's going to do is for the three categories available, it is going to create three separate sheets. So when I press OK, you will see furniture, office supplies, and technology, three separate sheets getting created from one pivot table. Do not put a column which has a lot of distinct values here because it will try to create that many sheets, which is not very beneficial. As you can see, it is not doing much. It is only filtering the data to that particular sheet, but it is much more helpful rather than me having to create three separate cuts or views manually. I'm just going to remove this. We don't need these for now. This is just a demonstration example. Perfect. That brings me to the end of pivot table, and I'm going to come back and start with the next session. Like I said, generative AI, I'm going to cover towards the end. Come back to session 3 now. In session 3, we started with VLOOKUP again, but a different example altogether. Start with 6.5 problem. And in this, what we did was, I'm going to remove the output that we had written earlier. Okay, and okay. Now I have different banks. For these banks, I want to get the different debit amounts. I have the data right here with me. The issue is that VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, index match will always return the first value. I want multiple values. So if I choose one particular bank, I have multiple transactions for those banks. So if I choose HSBC, I have multiple transactions. I want to get all the debit amounts listed horizontally against that particular bank. Now in that case, I need to ensure that I'm able to count the number of instances or the number of times each bank is appearing. So for example, for HSBC, I need 1 here, I need 2 here, I need 3 here, and I need 4 here. But I'm not going to do this manually. That's not the correct approach. What are we going to do is we're going to we're going to be using COUNTIF. So I can say equal to COUNTIF, and I can say my range is this, put a comma, my criteria is the first bank name. Now, the issue with this is that I'll have to first freeze this entire list because when I move down, I don't want my list to shift, but my criteria will have to move because for every row, the criteria is different. The issue with this formula is that when I select the entire range together and freeze it, it gives me the total count. So for HSBC, it's going to give me 4. I don't want total count. I want an instance wise count, which is when HSBC comes for the first time, I want 1. When it comes for the second time, I want 2. That way. So what you need to do is you need to make a minor modification. In this list or in this formula, the first part remains as it is, which is the first part of the reference, $J, $3, because that is the starting point. The second part will only be J3. So what we're essentially doing is we're saying that search for J3 only in the first cell. When I press enter, I get 1 because in that cell, BOA appears only one time. Highlight a few times. 1, 1, 1. But when I double click here, it is now searching in the first 3 rows. Reason is I started from J3, but I did not freeze the ending point or the end of the range. So it automatically keeps on shifting. Similarly, if I drag down, every bank has appeared one time exactly here. Now, if I come to the next row where BOB is appearing a second time, you will see I get the count as 2 because now, not in the entire column, but up to this specified range, BOB has appeared twice. Like this. Okay, and if I were to continue, double click, drag it down, and you will see that now it is counting the correct instances for each bank. I cannot search in the entire column together because that gives me the total count. So I do a row bias count, I drag, and that is how the formula is able to count the instance. Now I just don't want the number because the number is not helpful because I'm not able to identify the bank and their instance. So what I'll do is I'll simply concatenate the bank name with the instance. So J3, just putting some spaces for clarity, does not have an impact on the formula, and the instance. So HSBC1, HSBC2, HSBC3, and HSBC4. Now when I write the VLOOKUP formula, I'm going to say equal to VLOOKUP. Now my lookup value is not going to be the bank name because I cannot search basis the bank name because I'll only give me the first value. I want multiple values, and in that case what I do is I say I want to search for the bank name and the instance number together. This concatenation makes it BOA1, and that is what I'm going to search for here. Then for the next one becomes BOA2, 3, 4, and 5. So on and so forth for every other bank as well. Now here, because I'm writing one formula, I'm going to be dragging this formula. I need to ensure that I correctly freeze the ranges. When I move to the right, I don't want column B to shift. So F4 3 times to lock the column. Similarly for C3, when I move to the right, I want the column to shift, but when I move down, I don't want row number 3 to shift. So function F4 2 times to freeze the row reference. Put a comma. Now table array is going to be not from column J but from column I. Choose that. Output will be from column number 5, which is the debit column, and the last argument will be 0 for exact match. Press enter and you have your result with you. Because I'm going to be moving right, I also need to ensure that I is to M, which is my table array range, has to be fixed. Because when I move right, that range will also shift. I'm just going to break this down into multiple lines so that it is easier to read the formula. Okay, simple concatenation by first doing a countif and counting the number of instances. You just drag and you should be able to get the correct result. Obviously, in some cases, you're getting an NA because for HSBC, there is no fifth instance. For Bank of Baroda, there is no fifth instance. Just to validate, if you search for, if you filter for BOB, not BOA, sorry, BOB, there are only 4 instances. Hence, at the fifth instance, you get an NA. Obviously, you can suppress that NA by writing a if error. So I can come to my first formula. I can come back to the formula cell. I can say if error, this entire argument, because the VLOOKUP is resulting into one value and that will be part of the value argument. Put a comma after VLOOKUP and say double quotes, which is for blank, just 2 double quotes without anything in between. Drag the formula to the right, Control R, Control Shift down to highlight, Control D to copy the formula down. And you will see that the if error formula has gotten copied everywhere. This is the old method of doing a VLOOKUP with a filter, with a COUNTIF. The next method is a new age function called filter, which I'll just display for your reference right here. So what the filter function allows you to do is, from this specified range, I can filter for a set of values. So from this range, if I say equal to filter, and I have to include the array. So let's say I want all dates, but only for transactions from, let's say, HSBC. So for how do I include or specify that argument? The next argument is called include. So I'll have to choose the first column, which is the criteria column, say equal to HSBC, double quotes, close, close, enter, and it shows me only 2 dates because in this table, HSBC has only 2 transactions. If you can just quickly validate that, you can see there are 2 transactions. Why is it showing me a number? Because dates are numbers in Excel. So you can press Ctrl Shift 3 to convert them to dates. So these are 2 dates. The argument is that you first supply the array. It can be more than one column also that I want as the output. For example, for HSBC, let's say I want output from I2 till L12, which is the entire data. And I only want to look at rows from this table, which are equal to HSBC from the first column. And I'll get all the rows like this. Again, Control Shift 3 to convert it to date. These are numbers. This is the UTR ID and this is the debit amount. That is what the filter function does. So filter function can return multiple values because it is an array function. Here I'm going to simply say filter. I want debit amount, so this becomes my array. I don't need to select the header, doesn't make a difference. Comma, include bank name should be equal to the bank name right here. No need to apply dollar signs because this is a array function. You press enter and you will get 3 results. Again, this results is not for HSBC. It is just that it has found 3 results, so it is just splitting them or displaying them downwards. You want it vertically, or sorry, horizontally. Just use transpose, close the last bracket, and you will have the values this way. No need to apply dollar signs. No need to do anything else. The array remains same. No, in fact, sorry, my bad. Here you will have to apply dollar signs because you are selecting a range. So it has to always search from the first row itself. So transpose plus filter. Then if you want to do the same thing right here, where you want to get the UTR numbers, that what are the different UTR numbers for these banks. So transactions. So I select the UTR column, I freeze the entire thing, comma, bank name, control backspace to come back to the formula cell, F4 to freeze equal to BOA. Close the parentheses, multiple transaction values, because multiple transactions have been done. This is a larger data now compared to the previous sheet. Now I don't want this in separate cells. I want to combine them into a single cell, because if I transpose also, it is going to spill across multiple cells. So I want to combine all of this into a single cell. For that, we have a function called text join. In text join, we have to specify the delimiter. Let's say my delimiter is going to be a comma and a space, comma. Second argument is ignore empty cells, which means in case against BOA there is some value where UTR is not mentioned, it will ignore that. You can skip it. By default, it ignores empty cells. Third argument is text. In this case, it is the entire filter function. Close, enter, and you have all the UTRs listed in a single cell. Control shift down to copy down. I have frozen the ranges, remember, because I have not selected the entire column, so I have to freeze. That is the most advanced. Again, there are multiple different variations that you can cover. Right? These are some that are very useful. Now, this is called indirect with VLOOKUP. I have three sheets: month-jan, month-feb, month-march. In all these three sheets, my data is at the same position, which means from column B to column E. Number of rows do not matter. Column positions are same. So name of the bank is in column C, state is in column D, and number of branches are in column E. Structure of the data remains same. I want to write a VLOOKUP formula that allows me to choose. So I have a drop down here for different sheet names. This is created manually. So if I can just show you, data validation, the sheet names are just added here with a comma, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to ensure that whatever sheet I choose, I get the output from that sheet. So if I say Feb, I want output for these line items from the Feb sheet. If I say March, I want output from the March sheet. So for that, we need to do something, which is when I say equal to, and I come to, let's say, Jan, and I just choose this value. Now, when I choose a value from a different sheet, we get the sheet name in the formula as well. Now, when you have the sheet name in the formula, what it means is that E3 is not coming from this sheet, it is coming from a different sheet. Now, if I want to rely on the drop down, I need to concat or make this part dynamic, which is the sheet name. So if I'm able to somehow construct a method where I'm able to make this dynamic, I should be able to make my entire workflow automated. So I'll start by replicating this design of the syntax. So you need to have the first single quote. Then I need to have an and. Now I don't need month Jan because this is something that I'll be supplying from the cell above. So I'll choose that cell, F4 to freeze it. Another and to concatenate the last part, which is single quote and exclamation mark. But that is not going to be it. I'm just going to put a few spaces here, so make it more readable. These spaces have no impact because they're not inside the double quotes. Enter, and I will have something like this. When I change this to Jan, I'll have something like this. What is missing is the range reference. In all these cases, my data starts from column C because I can't select the serial number column because my lookup value is in column C. So from C to E, from C to E, and from C to E here as well. Right? So name of the bank, state, and number of branches. Come back, double click. In the last part, C:E. Now this is just a text value. To convert this text value into a reference, you will have to use the indirect function. So what indirect will do is I will say indirect. The idea or the job of the indirect function is returns the reference specified by the text string. So I say indirect, I close. It is going to give me a spill error. Reason is that I am trying to get values that are quite large in nature, right? Because I select the entire column. So it does not have space to put those values in the third row. Because I selected from column C to column E, I select from C1 to E 10,48,576. Hence you get a spill error where it does not have enough space. When I put that in the first row, I get the output. But I'm not concerned with the output because I'll be filtering the output anyways here with the VLOOKUP. So now you start writing your VLOOKUP. So this entire thing is your table array. This entire thing is your table array argument. So you start writing the VLOOKUP function. You choose your lookup value. This entire thing is your table array. Put a comma after the table array. Column index number is going to be 3, comma 0 for exact match. Close the parentheses and you have the output right in front of you. You can change the sheet name from the top and that sheet name gets fed into the indirect function and you get a output from that particular sheet. Tomorrow if more sheets were to be added, just come to the data validation box, add the sheet names and you're good to go. You don't have to do anything else. Your formula will automatically update. So three concepts here: creating the drop down using a VLOOKUP and using the indirect function to automate the process of extracting data from multiple sheets. Can work with multiple workbooks as well, but there has to be the same structure of data in all the files or all the worksheets. Let's look at how to create a dependent list in Excel. So I have two lists here. I have the job family and I have the sub job family. This is the main list. This list is going to be dependent on list in column B. So the first thing that you will do is you will get a unique of this list, which is from B3 to B1285, because I want to get the unique values. Then from those unique values, unique is a simple function, you will create a drop down here from the unique value. So this drop down is not coming from any other sheet. It is coming not from the larger range, rather from column E. In the newer, yeah, so from column E. If I can just show that to you, I can go to data validation. So data and data validation, and it comes from E3 to E16, which is that nothing but this unique list. Now my main formula is here, which is a simple filter function. So just to show you, first remove the unique. What I'm saying here is that I want to filter the array, which is I want output from column C, but only for those rows in column B that are equal to my selected value here. So when I press end, it gives me all the values, right? It gives me all the values. The reason is, now here what has happened is operation multiple times production is coming. I need to get a unique list. So here what I will do is from my filtered range also, I will say I only want unique list, and I will close, enter, and I will only get a unique list. The shortcut is Alt down arrow key to see the drop down list. I can change and I can see whatever I want this way, right? You can also use a function called sequence to create a sequence of dates, where I'm simply saying that I have a list of dates here. I have a starting and an ending. So I have 5th of February was to 17th of February. Let's make that 11th for now, so that we're able to visually see the list. Formula is fairly simple. I'm using a function called sequence. How does it work? In the sequence function, I can specify, let's say, rows. So it gives me 5 rows. If I say, sorry, if I say 5 rows across 2 columns, which is the second argument, it'll give me this. If I say I want a starting point, let's say I don't want to start at 1, I want to start at 0. So it will start at 0. And then if I don't want to, or if I want to put some steps in, say intervals, and if I say 5, it's going to create the list at intervals of 5. So 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. That is what it is going to do. Powerful function. I'm using that to get this. So my rows are going to be nothing but the difference of my maximum and start and my end date. I'm doing a +1, otherwise it skips out on the final date. I am only working in the first column. I want only one column as an output. And my starting point is the date from here, which is my start date. And you get a unique list. Becomes dynamic. So if you make this as 1, it'll give you this. So 1st to 11th. If I don't use that +1, what happens is, which is this, it skips the last date. This one, it skips the last date. So I can just use a +1 there to ensure that the last date also gets included. Because what I'm essentially doing is, when I subtract, I get 10. So 11 minus 1 is 10. And I need to do a +1 to get 11, because I have 11 days. So you can use sequence, which is another powerful function. Moving on to the next example, which is charts. I had done one example. I'll just replicate that example in a different sheet. So create a copy of the sheet, delete this, and remove the hidden values. Perfect. So I have a dummy chart here. What you want to do is you want to have a benchmark, which is a line which is not present in the chart, sample chart. We can have that like a reference line. And when the user chooses number of values, those values should get highlighted. So top 5, top 3, top 10, etc. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a simple chart. So I go to insert, I go to charts, and I choose the first one, which is clustered column. Now on the chart, there are some basic formattings that you can do immediately to enhance the visual appeal of the chart. First is remove the title from here for now. Second is remove the grid lines for now. Remove the axis labels on the left. On these, right click, format axis, and I need to find label position. So right here, it is horizontal. Can I? So because of the font, they're not visible correctly. So what I can do is maybe I'll just change the chart to a bar chart, not a column chart, so that we can at least see the columns names, access names correctly. Control B to make it bold. Come to font and change the color to a darker gray. From this bars, right now the bars don't look very elegant, so you can right click on the bars, go to format data series, and here reduce the gap width between the bars. So the bars will appear much more elaborate. I'm going to increase the height of the chart here, and again on the bars, just reducing the gap width a little for each of these. So I'm going to make that, let's say, 40%. I'll have something like this. I'm going to right click on any one of the bar. In the fill option, choose this dark blue color for now, or maybe a solid gray color, or lighter gray like this, because I will be making some modifications where only the labels, the top three values that are chosen, will get highlighted. Now I need to first add a benchmark. To add a benchmark, which will be referenced from this cell, I need to come to the data here and create a helper column. So I'm going to call this benchmark. It's going to be simple. It's just going to be this value. I'm going to freeze it and I'm going to drag it down. To include this value in the chart, I can click on the chart. Right now my chart is referencing column N and column N, M and N. I can hover over this corner, left mouse click and expand. Same value, hence it is showing as a column because I started with a bar, clustered bar. Right click, change chart type, come to combo. Automatically it makes the second one a line. Converts that to a column like this. You can always go back and make this from a clustered column to a clustered bar. Now, in fact, we can leave it as a clustered column itself. And now what we can do is for the chart, when I change the value from here, let's say I make it, so the chart value will change. If I make it something else, so user can decide what the value will look like on the chart. Additionally, what I'll do is, right now I don't have data labels enabled. When I enable data labels, what happens is, the data labels are quite large because these are numbers in lakhs. So the value will come for all of these. Now, for the benchmark, I don't want the data labels for sure. So I can click and delete. For the actual values, I can try one thing, which is do a custom formatting for this. So I can go to control 1, go to custom, and I can say I want to have this formatting, which is for lakhs. Actually, not that one. I want to have the formatting, which is going to be, is it this? Let me just check. Yeah, with the rupees symbol, but again, there is an overlap that happens there. What I can do is I can create a helper column again, where so for now I'll just remove the data labels. The idea of the helper column is I can have my values displayed in a smaller numerical, smaller set. I'm just going to delete the axis. We don't need that. So I'm going to say this is going to be my data label value equal to this divided by 5, 1 lakh. Control Shift 1 to format. Now I can mention somewhere on the chart that my value is in lakhs, but that's again being automatically picked up from this cell. So right now I can click, I can enable data labels, and once I do that, I have the original data label. I can clear the data label from the line. I can right click on any one data label, go to format data labels, and here right now it is taking the value. I can ensure that I click on value from cells and I choose this range. I press OK and that range gets popped up. I can remove the actual value and I will have something like this. Makes it much more easy to read, much more easy to understand. You can always press Ctrl B, reduce the font size, come back to the header, make it bold, make it darker like this. Perfect. Now it's gonna position the line at 810, rather 850. Okay, perfect. Now what I also want to do is I want to add this top value in the chart. Before that, a quick show. So if I hide the two columns, they get hidden from the chart, those values. Reason is charts cannot show hidden values or hidden ranges. You'll have to right click on the chart, go to select data, click on this hidden empty cells, click this option, show data in hidden rows and columns. Press OK, press OK again. Right click here because these are helper columns, I don't need them. And I'm going to say hide. Just adding a column here for a gap. Now I want my top n values. You will have to use a function called rank average, where I want to get the rank for these values against these values. Press enter and I get my result. Right? The function is called rank average. This is my number, this is my reference. So the highest value in this case is, I think it did it the other way around. Sorry, the highest value in this case is 1, which is 17 lakh. Lowest value is this, 73,000. Now, I don't want to see all my values. I want to see whichever value is chosen here, number of values chosen here. So I can just wrap this around in an if function. So I can zoom in to show you the formula. I'm going to say this is my logic, but before that I'm going to say if the rank is less than or equal to 3, right? Because if I say 3, I can't have less than 3. So it'll only show me two values. So I'm going to say less than or equal to 3. Then I want to look at the sales amount. Else I want to look at nothing, which is blank. So just break this down into 3 lines. So first one is logical test. This is value of true. This is value of false. Enter. It'll only show me top 3 values. I can say 6. It'll show me top 6 values. Again, how do I include it in the chart? Click and it will. Okay, one second. Let me just unhide these for now. Okay, click on the chart and it should show you the selection, which for some odd reason it is not doing, but that's okay. What you can also do is you can right click, go to select data, and I can say that I want to now add top n values also. So top n values is the series name and series value will be all these values. Now, although these are blank cells, they will still get plotted as 0. So I have to right click, go to change chart type, go to combo, ensure that the top n values are also a clustered column chart. Press OK. I'll get this sort of an overlap. I don't need the larger number to be visible on the chart, so I'm going to remove that. Right click on any one of these, go to format data series. You can reduce the gap width so that the bars appear thicker, and to fix the overlap you can make it 0%, or sorry, you can make it 100%. When you make it 100%, because this top n values is something that I added later, so that comes as the top layer. Hide everything else, show only your original data, which was product and sales, and you have a much cleaner chart here, which is dynamic as well, because now if the user chooses 3 values, you see 3 getting colored. If they say 10, 10 get colored. If they say 5, 5 get colored. Again, there are a lot more variations that you can do. I don't like the color of this line. I'm just going to change that. So line outline is going to be a darker gray like this. Perfect. And I have a perfect line with me. I'm just going to make this 7. I would like to show one last thing, which is getting a dynamic chart title. Right now I don't have a chart title, so I will enable the chart title box here. Now to create a dynamic chart title, you need to have certain elements. Right now it is not showing me the overall. Right now the chart title is going to be static. How do you make it dynamic? What you can do is you can say equal to, it's going to be nothing but concatenation. Okay, so let's say I want to get the contribution of the top n values. So whatever values are there in the top n, I want to get the contribution of those compared to overall sales. So I'm going to say sum values from this range divided by sum of values from overall sales, which is this. Right? So it tells me it's 57%. So top 5 values contribute 57% to overall sales, which is okay. Now what I'll do is I will use a simple concatenation formula. So now that I have this number, I'll say double quotes top then double quotes, and whatever value is chosen here, then and double quotes, contribute, just put a space there, contribute, put a space again, put an and, then this number which is 57%, put an and, double quotes, to overall sales, double quotes close, enter, and you have this simple concatenation, nothing complicated, right? Right now the number is not coming up correctly, so for that we will do a simple round to get the number rounded off to 2 decimal places and 0.58, but I still want to display it as a percentage, so I will say text function, and in the text function I'm going to say comma, the format is going to be 0.00%, close, and I'll have 58% like this. Now how do I link this to the title? Click, go to the formula bar, equal to cell reference, enter, make it bold, change the color to like a darker blue so that is more solid, reduce the font height, and there you go. So you can hide this column as well, not required. You can hide these additional columns as well, not required. And there you go, you have your dynamic chart. When you change the result, the overall percentage also changes. So the color is also changing, the value of the selected is also changing, and the percentage is also changing. So my top 10 values contribute to 88% of my overall sales. Top 10 subcategories rather. So I can just quickly modify that. So it's V2. So Control G, go to V2, press F2, top 10 subcategories. That's it. And there you go. You can increase the font size to be slightly larger. And there you have it. Now, multiple variations. I just showed you a bunch of things, mostly from an awareness perspective. If I make it 7, I have around 7. So top 7 subcategories contribute 72% to overall sales. And that brings me to the end of the complete recap of the 3 sessions that I have done. I'm not going to go to generative AI, but I'll be recording that as a separate session. I'll be sharing additional videos with you for reference. Thank you if you watched till the very end. Hope you had a good learning session.